Hello, and welcome to the Astoria Bookshop event for Sex and the Single Woman. I'm going to have to read the, the subtitle. 24 Writers Reimagine Helen Gurley's Brown's Cult Classic. I got my way through that name. We are, I think, Briallen is currently sorting through some technical issues. She should be back shortly, but we are going to go through the intro while we're here. So we are joined today by co-editor Haley Swanson and two of our contributors. And I am going to go over a few little housekeeping rules for anyone watching, and then I'm going to introduce these lovely writers/editors, and we're going to hear some readings and some Q&A discussions. Okay, so I'm Laura. I'm the events coordinator at the Astoria Bookshop. If you don't know who we are a general interest bookstore in Astoria, Queens, and we are so happy to have you here tonight. Other than that, if you want to ask a question, I will pop back in at around 7:45 to facilitate the Q&A. There is an Ask a Question button at the bottom. You can ask a question yourself. You can vote on other people's questions if there's something you really want to see answered and you want it to move up the line. Other than that, you can chat on the sidebar, leave nice messages, say hi. Please keep it respectful. Obviously, my rule of thumb is don't say anything you wouldn't want your boss or your mom to see. That's usually a good rule of thumb. And other than that, yeah, don't forget to pick up your copy. It is a wonderful collection, and it can be yours for a low price that I don't have off the top of my head right now, but you can go to AstoriaBookshop.com and find that for yourself. Throw it in your cart. Throw a few other things in your cart. All right. Other than that, I'm going to introduce these lovely contributors, editors, and we are off. Let's start with the co-editor, Haley Swanson. Haley Swanson is an MFA candidate at Sarah Lawrence College, where she's working on a memoir about female obsession as told through her time abroad. Her essays have appeared in The Rumpus, Glamour, Electric Literature, Creative Nonfiction, Brevity, and elsewhere. With Eliza Smith, she's co-editor of the anthology Sex and the Single Woman, and she lives in New York. Yay! This is a very New York, Astoria, especially positive space. Braylon Hopper is the author of Hard to Love, Essays and Confessions, a Kirkus Best Book of 2019. She teaches creative writing at Queens College, CUNY, and lives in Elmhurst, Queens, with 1,000 books and 100 dresses, as it should be. That is my ideal way to live. Jennifer Chowdhury is a journalist and writer dedicated to stories on migration and immigration, with a special focus on women of color around the world whose voices are stifled by patriarchy, systematic racism, and socioeconomic burdens. She spent 2 years reporting on the, I'm going to try to say this right, Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, NPR, The Guardian, The New York Times, Elle, and more. Jennifer, I'm so sorry. Can you clarify the pronunciation on that? Oh, it seems like two of you are muted. There we go. Sorry. Try again, Jennifer.
It's Rohingya mostly. I think some people do say Rohingya, but I say Rohingya. So
okay. Well, thank you. And with that, I will hand it off. I believe we're going to jump into readings first. Haley, if you want to introduce the first piece.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit just because I think, I think it'll make the most sense. The title of my piece is called "In Pursuit of Brown on Brown Love." Okay. My parents are devout Muslims and consider it blasphemy to marry outside of the religion and because of cultural sentiments outside of the race. Like so many first-generation immigrant parents, they were focused on making sure their American-born daughters were connected to their roots. Their race consciousness, too, ran deep. As a new immigrant and mom of two in her early 20s, My mother devoured PBS documentaries and taught us everything she learned about racism, the history of colonization, and the effects of white supremacy. I learned pretty early on that European settlers had stolen and looted this land from its indigenous inhabitants, then shipped in boatloads of African men, women, and children to work it, and eventually brought in more labor from other parts of the world, countries where people's skin was deeper, more complicated, more resilient. We deserve to be in America, which is stolen land, my mom would say, but it doesn't mean we have to live the way white people live. No way her daughters were lending any part of their bodies, and most certainly not their uteruses, to the white male. Other people of color, aka anyone non-Bangladeshi, were also off limits, especially if they weren't Muslim. Eventually, my mother conceded, but only theoretically and begrudgingly, that Muslims of other communities were fair game as spouses. As a young adult, I started to adopt similar sentiments. For hundreds of years, white men colonized my uterus. I would spout off to friends, but my friends who are like here have probably heard me say this in real life. I wasn't going to willingly subject myself to further colonization by procreating with a white guy. I was expected to marry one of my own, and truth be told, I was perfectly fine with that. Skin tone and ethnicity weren't part of the body image issues I struggled with, though there were others, intrinsic to being a girl and the first child of immigrant parents. Sorry, I got this alert. I have to postpone it. Sorry. I loved brown skin and brownness. It helped to grow up in New York City among various shades and complexions. I also loved being trilingual, speaking English, Bengali, and its close cousin, Hindi, the language of Bollywood movies. These cultures also came with their own fashion and food and music. I didn't ever want to choose. Instead, I tried to blend all these identities together however I could to create a life that combined the best of all my worlds. It also helped that I didn't grow up around a ton of white people. My Queens neighborhood was low and middle income, home to Latin, Greek, and South Asian immigrants. Not quite the hood, but adjacent. And so my taste in men always ran hood adjacent too. I really owed the street smart boy falls in love with book smart girl story pretty hard. Clearly, that's why I'm here. But with a Bengali twist, I wanted my romantic trysts to be a perfect blend of Western life and Eastern sensibilities. By the time I hit puberty, the South Asian diaspora had finally acquired some street cred. Jay-Z had teamed up with Punjabi MC to produce a hit track that played nonstop on the radio and in clubs, further cementing my brown pride instead of wishing for blonde hair and blue eyes. In fact, where I grew up, whiteness bordered on corny. Membership in the black and brown worlds carried with it grit and edge. And so, I never once thought of American culture as being exclusively white, even though the dominance of whiteness was difficult to deny. Though I desired brown love, I didn't want it the way my parents envisioned it. As a kid, my worst fear was having an arranged marriage like my parents. I was determined to find love on my own. My worries weren't unfounded. In the future, I'd spend my 20s and early 30s fending off what were known as biodatas, resumes of prospective grooms from the motherland, which are really just packets of awkwardly posed, horribly filtered photos of eligible men who had graduated from top schools around the world. But my checklist did not include marrying a man from Bangladesh and bringing him back home with me. I'd always wanted my male counterpart to be a fellow kid of immigrants, or someone who'd immigrated themselves at an early age. An unbridgeable gap of language and ideologies existed between men straight from the homeland and women like me. And then in the middle, you can read all about all the crazy crap that I went through to get to a pretty significant part of my life. So I'm going to skip a little. After 20 years of chasing a Bollywood-worthy story, I was exhausted. It was time to do things differently, to stop dating for a while and learn to enjoy my own company, to accept that life without a traditional marriage to a man with a superficial list of qualities was the healthier choice. The narrative I'd been fed as a girl about what brown on brown love would look like might have worked out for the other Bangladeshi girls I grew up with. But I started to think, peacefully, that my path was meant to veer away from this narrative. 3 years of working through the fear of loneliness to discover the unimaginable perks and freedom of singlehood led to the opportunity to achieve another dream, a foreign correspondent position in Bangladesh covering the Rohingya refugee crisis. The move also provided me space to take the pressure off getting married and healthily distance myself from my family and the close-knit immigrant community I grew up in. It was too painful to continue my patterns and live in the world I'd known my whole life. And reader, as you probably predicted, that's when I finally met my husband. I had no clue I was starting a whole new chapter of my love life when a new friend and her boyfriend invited me on a trip to the scenic Chittagong hill tracts of southern Bangladesh, where foreigners usually aren't allowed. Some of her boyfriend's friends joined us, and one of them chatted me up. He poured me drink after drink, carried my luggage off the bus to the hotel, rolled joints for me. I'm going to love it when my kid reads this, by the way. We have a kid, spoiler alert. I was living on the edge of homesickness, and he felt like home. I'm going to stop there because I think I will let everyone else read for themselves.
Thank you so much, Jen. I know applause aren't as great on Zoom or wherever we are right now, but love it. Well
Thank you.
Bree, would you like to jump in?
Sure. So my essay is, it's about fashion and body image, and it's called Sex in the Single Frump. You need to look glamorous every minute, writes Helen Gurley Brown in a siren song from beyond the grave. I'm sure wherever she is now, she's perfectly turned out, face spackled with Max Factor pancake makeup, wig sleek and glossy. By the way, I didn't realize that like wigs were such a big deal in like 60s fashion until I read Sex and the Single Girl. Yeah, wigs were big. Chanel suit tailored close to the bone and hunger pangs ignored even in the afterlife. I first read Sex and the Single Girl in my teens, and even though my style aspirations were more Courtney Love than Cosmo Girl, I was swept along by the book's campy verve. I couldn't help being fascinated by Brown's brisk, bossy tone and her brash attempts to initiate the reader into her version of self-made beauty with advice like, if your fat little tummy should have been lopped off 2 years ago, lop it off. Her unapologetic ruthlessness reminded me of the gruesome Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella, in which the stepsisters literally cut off their heels and toes to fit into the magic slipper. I read the book with a dash of irony. I was partly in it for the retro references to wine for breakfast diets and pink silk capri pants, but I was also susceptible to its messaging. I was genuinely overwhelmed by how out of control my body felt and how harsh the world seemed. Brown's drastic recommendations seemed proportionate to the pressure I felt to be perfect, or at least passable. I like to imagine a future in which I, like Brown, would face a sexist system armed with thinness, bright lipstick, and an impeccable outfit. Now I'm her worst nightmare. My work-from-home wardrobe consists of a bunch of shapeless flannel nightgowns that my boyfriend calls billow cases. I don't distinguish between sleepwear and daywear, and my hair hasn't been cut in almost a year. My toenails are streaked with faint traces of ancient polish that I haven't bothered to remove. I can no longer fit into most of my clothes, and I recently found my long-lost Fitbit under the radiator, literally gathering dust. I've never looked less glamorous, and I've never felt more at peace. This truce with my looks was hard-won. I'm 42, I'm 44 now, and I've definitely served my time with mainstream beauty standards. My hippie mom banned Barbie dolls, but it didn't matter. I was anorexic by 13, which later almost caused me to be uninsurable because it counted as a pre-existing condition. As a high schooler, I begged my parents for a breast reduction that I didn't need and we couldn't afford, and covered my arms with third-degree cigarette burns. In my 20s, I dated someone who told me he'd broken up with a previous girlfriend, an eating disorder survivor like me, because she gained weight. Instead of hearing red flag, I heard stay thin. For years, I read feminist critiques of beauty and diet culture and agreed with them in theory, but I couldn't quite bring myself to put them into practice. Instead, I dealt with my ongoing anxiety and depression by restricting my eating, compulsively clothes shopping, and climbing endless flights of stairs. Something had to give. I was exhausted. In my mid-30s, heartbreak, stress, and diet fatigue finally convinced me to change my relationship to my body and to clothes. I stopped counting calories and grew several sizes, gaining a new heftiness that made me feel both liberated and invisible. Instead of the fitted vintage outfits I favored as a young adult, I started wearing voluminous dresses and orthopedic flip-flops, mom or grandma fashion, with no children or grandchildren to show for it. I even embraced frump as a kind of feminist aesthetic. I discovered and loved Emma Copley Eisenberg's classic essay, Notes on Frump, A Style for the Rest of Us. And I wrote my own admiring essays on frump icons Shirley Jackson and Grace Metalius, who embodied the kind of rumpled, dumpy, fat white lady writer vibe I was heading for. I knew I'd finally arrived when a cat caller yelled at me, "Damn, those shoes look comfortable." Then a cancer scare and colon surgery made me temporarily incontinent, and a few months in adult diapers sounded the death knell of any residual aspirations to glamour I'd been clinging to. I welcomed the end of an era, spiritually ready to embrace a life of messy top knots and infrequent makeup. Reveling in dishevelment has been a happy ending of sorts, and I'm grateful for it. I'm glad I'm done losing sleep over my curves and scars, at least for now. Then again, like most happy endings, it's not that simple. Who gets to be a frump, and who wants to be one? When I was a fashion-conscious grad student applying for academic jobs, I had a practice interview with a powerful professor in my program, a white woman with a plain gray hair who always wore nondescript clothes and no makeup. Instead of offering me substantive feedback on my performance, she sent an email blast to all job candidates telling us to avoid colorful nail polish. She said she found it so distracting that it was impossible for her to concentrate on what interviewees were saying. My nails had been painted red. On the surface, the anti-fashion professor doesn't seem to have that much in common with Helen Gurley Brown. In fact, they might seem to be at opposite ends of the glamour spectrum. But as I've reread Sex and the Single Girl, I've realized that the professor's pronouncement against stylish manicures is strikingly similar to Brown's aversion to curves and her repeated warnings about wearing too much jewelry and looking, quote, too ubangi. What unites these advice-giving women across the decades is their whiteness and the way they wield it. Implicitly or explicitly, they both define acceptable ways to look against the looks associated with Black women and other women of color. As sociologist Sabrina Strings documents in her book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia, American beauty and diet culture is based on this kind of racialized body and style policing and has been for centuries. There's no way to get dressed or prepare for a job interview without getting entangled in this ongoing history. What this means, among many other things, is that not everyone can get away with being a frump. Depending on who's wearing them and who's viewing them, frumpy styles can come across as, this person is rejecting glamour on principle or stylishly participating in a cool anti-fashion fashion trend. Or, this person is poor, depressed, clueless, and or insecure. Or, this person is an entitled asshole who doesn't respect others enough to dress up for them. Or, this person is invisible to me. Race, class, gender, size, age, employment status, disability status, accent, all of these affect the ways we present ourselves to the world and the ways we're perceived. Being able to be frumpy in public without negative consequences is not an option for everyone. And frump is not an option that everyone wants. Insofar as frumpiness is the sartorial equivalent of unseasoned food, it can be an unappealing and even oppressive aesthetic. For me, frump might feel like a comfortable invisibility to cloak, but to others, it can feel like a painful erasure. If you belong to a category that glamour has been defined against, glamour might not be something that you want to civil right to Black glamour, a significant part of the civil rights movement. Fashion journalist Nichelle Gaynor celebrates this kind of groundbreaking style in her lavish coffee table volumes, Vintage Black Glamour, and Gentleman's Quarters, which illustrate how Eartha Kitt, Sidney Poitier, and others have wielded a kind of culture-shaking beauty that reverberates across the decades.
looks like Bree is having a couple of technical difficulties.
Hello.
Hi.
This is the plight of doing virtual events. I think it seems like Briallen's having some connection issues, which is unfortunate, but they should pass soon. I'm hoping. Hopefully, she'll pass. She'll come back onto our screens soon. In the meantime, we could start with our discussion if that's something you're comfortable with. Not to cut Briallen short, although I feel like maybe her connection did that for her.
Yeah. If Bree comes back, we'll make sure to wrap up her essay. Because I do want her also, in the discussion. But Jennifer, we have some questions that are specific towards your piece. Is that Bree? No. Okay, she's gone.
I'm not sure.
So let's start off with a fun one, especially since we're kind of like in an in-between here. How do you approach writing about exes?
I don't give a rat's ass about what they think, like at all, unless, and I barely ever write about the nice ones. I mean, there's like, I don't know, can barely count on how many nice ones there are, or good ones, non-toxic ones. But yeah, I don't care, so far I haven't named them. I am conscious of legal situations, that much I am. For writers in the audience, I'll initial, I'll find other ways to mark them, because I don't even want to go back to them to like ask them for permission. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. But emotionally speaking, it's interesting. I want to actually talk a little bit about when you guys approached me to write this piece. It was and I know we've had this conversation over email and stuff a lot. I was so at that point in my life where I was ready to write this piece, because I'd been writing it in many, many ways over the years while I was in the middle of it. And I was about to, I was pregnant, I just got married, and I like totally new phase of life, and just like, happily and luckily so able to move on to the next phase of my life. I had done a lot of soul searching, a lot of eat, pray, love type of like stuff. So I was ready. So now when I can write about them with a degree of humor, I would say, but also being conscious of like the effect that they had on me, right? And what the changes and the lessons that I've learned.
Yeah, completely. Bree, hi, so good to see you. Sorry that ended up happening. Do you want to just hop back in? I'm like wanting to hear the end of it too.
I'm not sure where we left off, but
you were kind of talking about like the civil rights movement was the last soundbite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
No.
Let's see. All right, one moment. Okay. So, in her writing about the Supremes and other Black music icons, cultural critic Daphne Abrux has invoked the civil right to Black glamour as a significant part of the civil rights movement. Fashion journalist Nichelle Gaynor celebrates this kind of groundbreaking style in her lavish coffee table volumes, Vintage Black Glamour and Gentleman's Quarters, which illustrate how Eartha Kitt, Sidney Poitier, and others have wielded a kind of culture-shaking beauty that reverberates across the decades. For many Black people and people of color, insisting on their own style in a predominantly white and or frumpy fashionscape has long been a way to defy and navigate structures of racist exclusion, oblivious entitlement, and dubious or absent fashion sense. Learning this history has helped me better understand the political significance of style choices that I used to think of as mere personal preferences. With hindsight, I can see the racial exclusion in the white professor's email. I can also see the countercultural community building in my ultra stylish grad school advisor's decision to give all her advisees gift certificates for manicures. She was supporting us and her favorite nail artist, but more than that, she was resisting the oppressive idea that physical adornment is a distraction from the life of the mind. I now also have a better sense of why the program's only Latina faculty member told me so adamantly. When I went into this profession, I made a decision that I was not taking out my gold hoops for anyone ever. I thought of her when I read Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's tweet on the day she was sworn into Congress, the perfect rejoinder to white women who give toxic style advice. Quote, "Lip and hoops were inspired by Sonia Sotomayor, who was advised to wear neutral colored nail polish to her confirmation hearings to avoid scrutiny. She kept her red. Next time someone tells Bronx girls to take off their hoops, they can just say they're dressing like a congresswoman." I still love Frump, but I'm not as comfortable with it as I used to be. Like the mandatory glamour of Sex and the Single Girl, it's a flawed response to an impossible situation. In her famous monologue in The Devil Wears Prada, fashion magazine editor Miranda Priestley lectures frumpy assistant Andy Sachs, Anne Hathaway, about how even though Andy likes to think she's superior to the vapid world of fashion, she's still inevitably participating in it. The color of Andy's lumpy blue sweater can be traced back to the runways of Paris or placed in the context of the global fashion economy. There's obviously a lot that Miranda's monologue leaves out. Her trickle-down model of fashion ignores the fact that the designers she references probably borrowed or appropriated this color from stylish people on the street. She also doesn't mention that no matter what Andy wears, she still benefits every day from looking like Anne Hathaway. However, Miranda is right that even people who don't want to think about glamour are still subject to and complicit in its power in the workplace and elsewhere. No matter how lumpy our sweater or frumpy our flannel, we remain stuck in global and historical structures that monetize and sometimes weaponize style. In fact, frumpiness can be an evasion of more than just constricting waistbands. It can be a kind of refusal to recognize or reckon with the larger systems we live in and the way they oppress or reward us.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to hear the end. More virtual applause. Okay, so let's jump into a little discussion about the amazing pieces you both just read. I'm so happy I got to work with you on them. And, you know, I was just rereading them today for like truly the millionth time, but it never gets old. And I found both seem to kind of be about these journeys that you had with yourselves to kind of solidify your sense of self in your adulthood. And I was wondering, you know, what about that idea or like narrative arc of finding yourself do you think is very applicable to the female experience, and especially in your case, Jen, with being a second generation immigrant?
So I was never told to find myself. I was never told. I'm going to quote my mom because she has the best quotes ever. So she's going to probably make it in anything I ever write. She's like, "You're not white. We don't do that," you know? And I think, you know, what she really means is that we've never had the privilege of doing that, right? But it's just something I felt like I needed to do because nothing was working. And I wasn't happy. It's intuitive. It's, you know, but also I was tired of, like, because my piece is about my love life, about these men telling me that I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of, you know, of love. I'm not worthy of respect. I'm not worthy of anything in that vein. But I felt worthy. There was a contradiction there, you know. When I looked in the mirror, I was like, oh, I'm pretty banging. I'm pretty cute. Like, you know, and I'm outspoken and I'm smart as all hell. So what is the problem here? Like, where is the disconnect, right? And I had to find that out. I had to find that out for myself. Where is the disconnect? Because you can be a very confident person and not have self-love, right? And that was, I think, my journey, that I was confident, but I didn't like truly love myself. And so that was the journey to find that.
Yeah. Bree, how about you?
Yeah, I think something that I really felt, and I related to lots of parts of your your essay, Jen, when you were talking about just like the having like really clear family or community expectations that you just didn't feel like ultimately like that you kept like sort of feeling it was you had to find your way in relation to them. I really felt like whether it was from Helen Gurley Brown or it was from other places, that there were just like people were just sort of saying like, here are the rules, here's the way the world works, like deal with it, conform, like, you know, just I'm gonna like be real with you, like all that people care about is like the way you look and whether you can be like the way that you can kind of like succeed in certain ways as a kind of conventional femme person. And so I think that like it took me a long time to just get so tired of like the misery of trying to accept that eventually I was just like, okay, I'm gonna start looking for other alternatives. But yeah, I feel like it's a real fight. I don't know if I'll ever find myself, but I feel like there's definitely been a process of at least like trying to find other options.
Yeah.
I mean, you change all the time, right? Like it's versions of yourself. Like I have a 1.5-year-old and I don't know who the hell I am right now. Like I have a whole other journey that I'm on. Like this is me pulling out all the stops, you know, this used to be the normal. So, so yeah, I think it's, you arrive at a point and then you got to start again. That's how I feel at least right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Which is a perfect segue into a question for you, Jen. You know, as we all heard, your essay deals a lot with former stages of your life. How has the way that you remember those years or like the lens that you view them through changed since your daughter came into the world?
Oh my God. So sometimes I get really angry when I think about all the assholes, you know, of the world that she's going to face and all the people that are like going to try to bring her down because that's just the way it is. Most people in the world face that. And as a, you know, if she identifies as female, that's going to be a whole other battle in itself, right? So, but then there's another part of this. I grew up here without any extended family for a very, very long time. It was just my parents and my little sister and me. And it's a very common immigrant story of like when you're the firstborn, you know, you're the one like translating things. You're the one that's like, you know, navigating your grown adults when you're a child yourself and figuring out your world. So I think she will probably not have that burden. And the other thing is that she's not growing up alone. When I see her with my parents, I'm like, wow, that's what I missed out on with my parents leaving their homeland to raise us in a different place and doing it all alone. And that self-love, that, you know, just worth that comes from all the like positive energy that you get from the people around you. And also, you know, like I think my family, like my parents, like me, we've all grown. Like we've grown together. When your parents, especially when you're young parents, you grow with your children. So and I see how differently my parents treat one is she's a grandchild, so they're just spoiled rotten. But just, you know, just a lot of awareness that they didn't have the luxury of having, right? So I'm I have a pretty positive outlook, to be really, really honest. So she's also really young, so God knows what's gonna happen. But I just I know that I can, to the best of my ability, prepare her with all the tools that I didn't have, and that I also know that I don't know shit, and that I'm gonna have to learn. So I'm ready for that too.
I love that. I feel like that's the best approach one could have. So Bree, I also wanted to talk to you about the fact that you read Sex and the Single Girl when you were a teenager, which I can't even imagine what that would have done to my psyche if I read it as a teenager. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how your view of the original Sex and the Single has changed since then? Was it weird reading it again when you were an adult? How did that feel?
I think I read the book like with two there are two simultaneous ways of reading. I feel like maybe this is something that a lot of people relate to with like things that are called like guilty pleasures or problematic faves or whatever, where it's like there's one level where I don't know, have people have seen Down with Love with Renee Zellweger?
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's basically it's sort of based on Sex and the Single Girl in a way, but it's basically just this like frothy 1960s rom-com where they're just like really leaning into the like mod style and just the excitement of like women in the workplace and the way that was all like new, and the way that this idea of like women, ambitious women who were like wanted to like succeed in the workplace and get the guy and like look amazing every second. And there's a way that like that I at the time as a teenager and even now I can get kind of swept along with that and just be like, oh my gosh, this is like amazing. The glamour of it all. It makes like it makes things that like in reality like being a woman in journalism or in the workplace that are in reality like really challenging or punishing or exhausting or complicated, just is like, nope, it's just like you learn the rules and you do it and there it is. So I think part of me just like really enjoys the wish fulfillment aspect to it, or the kind of like retro retro vibe. And then I think part of me, and I feel like you did a really great job in your introduction and talking about this, where it's like also part of you just like has to be somewhat appalled at the way that she's just like you know, just like be what men want you to be, and that's the way. So I think that like as a teenager I was like a little bit more gullible, or at least like I was more willing to just accept like you either accept these rules and play by them and succeed, or you don't and you fail, and those are the only two options. And I feel like now I have like a little more sense that like no, there are cracks in the system, there are like other ways of living, like it's not as cut and dried. But I still like how pink it is. I still enjoy reading it in like small doses.
Yeah. If nothing else, it's extremely entertaining because it's just truly so bizarre. So yeah, thank God there are cracks in that system. So speaking of that, you know, young teenage era of one's life, when you both were growing up, what kind of narratives did you see about the woman finding herself, and how do you feel like those differ from the stories you're now telling?
I write about this in my essay. I can't think of any. Like I can't think of any. Yeah, I was a teenager in the early 2000s, late 90s. I can't think of anything. The end goal is always to get the guy, right? So it's like always to get the guy. There's a Bollywood movie that I write about in the story, which came out when I was 12. And long story short, it's about like, you know, it's about a first like generation immigrant family in London, like an Indian family. And the girl is like getting an arranged marriage to like her father's friend back in India. And her last wish is to go on a like, you know, train like trip, whatever, on the Eurail throughout Europe. And it's like her father's super strict, right? And there's a scene, and she's like a very obedient daughter. I don't write about this in the book, but there's a scene in front of like the fireplace, and it's beautiful, and there's like wafting music in the back, and she's like, I've never asked for anything. I know that like the rest of my life is decided. This is like the only thing I ever want. And at the time, I think, and then she does meet this like fabulous guy, and the whole story is like how she tries to convince her like dad to let her marry this guy instead of the other guy, right? But even then, I was like, ooh, travel first. And two, I love all the scenic stuff in Europe and all of that. But that sentiment of like asking for something something for yourself stayed with me. Like that really stayed with me. I don't think I understood to the full effect at 12, but that's why I'm thinking about this movie, I don't know, 20 whatever years later, because not that she got the guy and she was happily ever after, because we know that didn't happen. Like, let's get a part 2 here. But she got to go to Europe and wear like skanky clothes and, and things that she couldn't do at home. She got to leave her world. So yeah, that little part for me was like, well, you're gonna take that and you're gonna expand it. You're gonna take that and like run with it. So
yeah. Bree.
That's so inspiring. Yeah, I think like for me, so I was basically, as you can tell from the fact that I was reading Helen Gurley Brown when I was a teenager, I was not like really in step with my times in a lot of ways. But so I was really into like Jane Eyre and like 19th century literature, which is like a mixed bag. But a story that I've sort of held on to over the years is the story of a woman finding herself. I was always really fascinated by my grandma's story, where she, just like a lot of women in my family, got married right out of high school and had lots of kids. She like got married at like 19 or 20 and had 5 kids right away, and had a really traditional homemaker life. And then at a certain point in the 60s, she's just like, I want more. And she decided to like go back to college. She worked her way through school, working in the cafeteria. She got a BA, she got an MA. Her husband was like really not into it and very confused about what she was doing. And she managed to kind of like raise 5 kids and put herself through school, and then had a whole career as a high school teacher. And there was something really inspiring about that. And there's this like family legend moment where she was like frustrated with like the way the kitchen was, and she just took a sledgehammer and knocked down a wall. And I was just like, that's
wow.
That's the energy that I want to bring to life. So I think it was like very much at that moment she wasn't directly inspired by like Sex and the Single Girl, but it was like definitely that moment of like opening up possibilities for women in the 60s that she was participating in. So that's been really meaningful to me.
That's amazing. I feel like going down the street and buying a sledgehammer and sledgehammering my It's amazing. Okay, so final question. If you could go back and talk to the teenager reading Sex and the Single Girl, and also this lovely part of Jennifer's essay that I know you guys will all love when you read the full version, where you bring home the 90210 collector's card. If you could go back and talk to those people, what would you tell them?
Oh my God. Yeah. 4th grade, we had those collector's card of like 90210 characters, and you felt like they were like in your life, right? And also, I think I was like 8 or 9, so technically I was too young for that show, but whatever, it's the 90s, And there was so much shame, like I felt so much shame for like having those cards and like hiding them, and like it's not like I was like jacking off to them. I didn't do that yet. So like, like what was the shame there? But just like having a crush and like all of that, and that shame was like carried throughout my life, right? Of like whether first it was like having sex at a certain age, or wanting sex, or or just being okay. Like I remember when I was 19 or 20, and I had a lot of South Asian friends and family friends, and I think things are a little different now, but we were part of a pretty conservative era. And I literally said the whole world revolves around sex. Like, it's all about sex at the end of the day. Like, we're born from it, we die over it, we pursue things over it. And I remember everyone just looked at me blankly. And I thought I had said the most profound thing ever. I was like, I'm so freaking smart. Like, this is really smart. I was giving myself so much props. And I look back at my audience, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. 38-year-old me understands. They were petrified because it's true, and they resonated. But they were petrified because they could not, like, oh my God, does that make me a slut for thinking that? No, it makes you human. It makes you a woman. It makes you all of that. So even though I said it, I still judged myself, for it. And yeah, I would just, I don't think I would tell myself to do anything differently. I would go back and tell myself, like, you knew what the hell you were doing. All these other bitches, they needed to level up. So that's what I would tell myself.
Love it.
That's such a great answer. I think that what I would tell myself is that it's just stuff like that I would eventually find my people, and that I would find a place in the world. Like a lot of stuff that I just couldn't really imagine when I was a teenager. Just the idea that I would be in an environment that was like a little bit more conducive to flourishing than like a giant public high school, that like they're just like there are like more fun places to be and more fun worlds to inhabit. And it's like, and every decade of my life has actually so far like been better than the one before. And that's another thing. I didn't have that faith in aging, and I feel like that's something else I would say, that it's just like, there's a way that like being a teenager can often be the worst, and often gets better. And
it is the worst.
Yeah.
It is the worst. I would never go back, ever. Not for the skin, the hair, none of it. I would not. I would never go back.
Hello. Okay. Hi. We are going to, it seems like we have one audience question. If anyone still wants to put some in, you are welcome to. I just wanted to say it was so far such a lovely conversation. Any conversation and essay that mentions Sabrina Strings and Down with Love and like the trickle up theory of fashion is a conversation after my own heart. But oh no, and now it's Haley's turn to cut out.
Did we lose it?
That's okay. So this question is for you, Bree, if I may call you that. All right, okay. Emily McCann asks, what are your general thoughts on the body positivity movement and privilege? I know you touched on that a little bit, but I especially think of body positivity with social media, so I'd love to also hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, part of what I was sort of dealing with in writing this essay is that I find it really, I think it's like really important to push back against really oppressive messages. And so I feel like any way that people find to kind of carve out some space for themselves and push back against things that are making them feel not at home in their bodies, like, is good. But also I think part of what I was grappling with in this essay is the way that like I haven't really felt completely at home or settled in not just my physical body, but also just like in any kind of like movement or message. Either like there are parts of it that I might find like really useful or affirming, and then parts of it that might feel kind of like restrictive or not really true to my experience. And so I've been kind of like figuring out how to write about this stuff and trying to like proceed with some caution and care. So I feel like there's some body positivity stuff that I read and I'm just like, yes, and then some parts of it where I'm just like, okay, like that's not really something that I, or like body neutrality, or like all of the different kinds of like that acceptance or that pride, or like there's this huge range of different things that people find meaning and power in, and I feel like I just am kind of like learning and resonating with certain things, and then like feeling kind of confused or not connected to other things. I'm sorry, that's like a very big answer, but those are my thoughts. They're very much in motion. I'm trying to figure it out.
I think it's a great answer. And Jennifer, is there anything maybe you want to add?
Yeah, no, definitely. I was thinking about how a couple of years ago I've always been a chubby girl, big bone, whatever you want to call it, right? Or, a 15-year-old with big boobs, and no one really understood, what that was in my community. But a couple of years ago, I lost a ton of weight. Like I was on this like I was training, I was eating well, I was whatever well means. I was just like, I lost all this weight. I loved the compliments. I used to post before and after. And I used to get messages from people that I know and just people who just like whatever follow me from various, walks of life. A couple of people said to me like, oh, we never knew you had issues with your weight because you carry yourself so well, right? Again, going back to you can be confident but not love yourself part of the puzzle. And there's nothing wrong with losing weight. I don't think there's anything wrong with losing weight. But what I was doing was like throwing up in the bathroom because I worked out so hard. So maybe not do that. And then the other part is I was posting like before and afters. Right. And it wasn't like, oh, like I gained muscle and this is like, like the technique to do it or something like that. Like it wasn't like that kind of the way. It was more like, oh, look, I lost 10 pounds and this is what I look like. And I couldn't fit into these jeans before. I never thought I could my ass could look like that. And it's like, but then I would hashtag body positive, right? Because I didn't understand that, feeling good about yourself doesn't just mean body positive, right? Like I'm not at that weight. Am I not allowed to feel good about yourself? And then being a woman of color, what does that mean? There's all these conversations about BMI and your body holds weight differently. I'm South Asian. We are raised for generations on a diet of rice, right? And your bellies, in order to prevent starvation, we hoarded the carbohydrates and energy from the rice in our bellies so that we wouldn't starve to death. So that's something we should be proud of, right? Look how amazing our people are. But yeah, it took me a very long time through that journey of losing weight. I ended up appreciating my body for different reasons than what I thought I would, it wasn't just like, oh, look, I can lose all this weight and look good. It was also all the lessons I learned from it.
Yeah. I like that you kind of pointed out the way that we can conflate body checking on social media with celebrating your body.
Yeah.
And also I wonder that rice thing is really interesting. I wonder, my family's Hispanic, so and every woman in my family carries a lot of belly fat, so I'm interesting.
Yeah. I probably didn't the history and the facts are totally correct. Don't quote me on anything, but it's in the vicinity. It's in the vicinity. I mean, people from when you're malnourished, communities and things like that. You're not eating a ton of meat. You're not even eating a ton of vegetables. You're eating things that fill you up faster, right? So rice is one of those things. So.
Yeah. All right, and we have a question from Eliza that is. Something I'm also wondering, you both wrote your essays during such a difficult time, the pandemic and early motherhood, and probably other hard things Haley and I didn't know about. Can you talk about how? Smiley face. Let's start with Bree again, and then head over to Jennifer's answer.
Okay, so the editors know that I was not the fastest writer. So it took me, I feel during the pandemic, and especially the first year and a half of the pandemic, my writing speed, which was it was never incredibly fast. It was just sort of fine. And then it just sort of it took, everything was just moving through molasses. It was just so slow. So I feel there is this process. I also am is this long COVID brain fog or what's going on? I was really struggling to put ideas together. So I think it's just my process with writing this essay was partly that, and also partly just confronting a lot of things that I've been trying to avoid really thinking about hard. I didn't really want to think about why do I keep all these stresses I don't fit into? What's that about? So I think it was a good process of writing the essay, just in terms of forcing myself to think about things that I probably should think about. But also it was a very a very inefficient writing process. So I just had to rethink that. What about you, Jen?
Oh my God, I am so happy to hear that you were a slow writer, because as Eliza and Haley can tell you, I couldn't even fill out my forms properly. Like, you guys, we had to fill out like all this like legal paperwork. Why couldn't I fill out those forms? Like I would either forget or just like fill them out wrong. It was so funny. I was joking with Eliza about this. I was like, I couldn't fill out the forms. Like, forget about I don't know how I wrote a whole essay because I couldn't even fill out a simple form. It was quite funny. Quite funny because I have this, and my friend Corinne, who's like in the audience, is watching, and we always joke about this. I love filling out forms. I love filling out all that information. Like, it's very satisfying to me. I don't know why. I don't love it anymore. But I used to. Like, I was like the stage commented, she loves forms. I love that shit. So it felt like such a fail to me when I couldn't fill out those. Like, I didn't, my brain just wasn't registering. To give you guys a timeline and elicit a lot of sympathy for me. I think my deadline was a month before I was supposed to give birth, and then I couldn't do it. I said I could. I committed to it. I was like, yeah, sure. And then I was like, I can't do this. Can't do it. And these two lovely editors of ours were like, it's fine. You know, you like, whatever, get it like when you can. So then I think I might have submitted the first draft like a month and a half after. It was just mostly written, to be fair. It was just like, I didn't feel good about it. And then the rounds of edits, I think, were like in the first 6 or 7 months of my child's life. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no idea. But I will say this, that I felt like I had to succeed at this, mostly because I was so scared of losing my identity as like, in many ways. One, as like you know, like becoming a mother, like you just become a whole different person, and you hear all these like horror stories of like, you know, people just falling off. I didn't want to be that person. And then also I had traveled. I was living in Bangladesh as a foreign correspondent. I was also working for the UN later. And so I had a whole like expat life, you know? And so I had to come back to New York, and I had to come back and live with my parents because my husband was still like going through the immigration process, and like, it's like grown ass woman with a big ass belly about to give birth living in your parents' house. Like, that was crazy, but I needed them, you know? So yeah, it was, I don't know. I remember, I'm like, now going back into like that part of my life. It was crazy. But I felt like there was so much writing on this essay for me for that reason. I'm like, if I can do this, I'm still me. Like, I'm still like who I am and all this stuff. But I needed a lot of hand-holding. I needed a lot of deadlines. I needed a lot of support, which I got, and I was very lucky. And as like the eldest child and the first child of immigrants, we don't like asking for help. So that definitely taught me that, like, especially during the pandemic, we all needed to help each other. So
yeah, for sure.
This is, I think, the second event in a row where someone has mentioned being the eldest child of immigrants, and I just again want to acknowledge that my sister did not get enough credit as a baby. So she went through it. But yeah, you're both so wildly impressive for doing what you do, especially, I can't even imagine the motherhood element. Like, I just finished an essay that took me 2 years, and
Congratulations.
But yeah, I thank you so much for coming by and talking, and I'm sorry that Haley is having some issues at the tail end here, but I'm sure she would agree with me when I say that this has been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to all of your future work, and I look forward to everyone picking up a copy of the book, which they should. Other than that, yeah, have a good night, everyone.
yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. This was so fun.